Satnam, yogis and yoginis. Hello, welcome back. We reunite for one more stream. Today we have a topic that I've been fascinated with for a long time, a topic of chivalry. It's something that I've been reflecting upon. I read quite a bit a few years ago, or many years ago now, when I was contemplating about the qualities of a man. What qualities should a man develop? What would be the virtues that one man could cultivate in their life? So this is a topic we have for today. Hello, Le Hafakar. How are you doing? Satnam. I hope you're well. Welcome to the stream. We have the topic of chivalry today. I mentioned it in the last video when I was talking about OpenAI, OpenAI's ChatGPT, and AI in general. I was talking about how a new generation is coming, a new generation of AIs, and it's going to affect us. And there's a need for a certain alignment to these AIs. And I mentioned this code, this chivalry code, and I said, maybe we can do some video. So I think it would be nice, since it's so recent that I talked about this, that we do this today. But let me know how you feel about that. Let me know if you have researched it yourself. How it started for me, it was many years ago. I was thinking, how is it possible that a man can go into battle and, leave the castle? Yeah, I'm thinking about the Middle Ages, right? Leave the castle, leave your wife, your dame at home in the castle, leave your children, leave your lands, go to another place, have a battle, kill your friends, be killed, going through the whole horrors of war, and still come back home and still be a man and be sane and be healthy in your head. Yeah. So I was wondering, what kind of man is that? What kind of qualities does a man have to have in order to be able to have the battle, go to the battle, go through the horror, and come out unscathed, come out and still healthy, not with PTSD, but actually healthy in his way of being. And I thought, well, if there has been a lot of studies on this from the part of chivalry, then it might be something there that could be interesting for us to reflect upon. And I was thinking, well, can this be brought to today? Can it be brought forward? So I read online a few things that I could come with my, I could put my hands on, and I found this beautiful little text by Brian R. Price, which gives very simple, detailed 10 principles to live by, and he based them on the old code of chivalry. So I took it down, and I moved things around. I didn't change anything. I'm going to show it in the screen. This is the. Whoops. My camera froze. Hello, little camera. Why are you freezing? Okay, so it's not working. Never mind. I will just say it aloud then. Can this work? No. Okay, never mind. So I wanted to show that I didn't touch the original text at all. I have the original text here, and maybe I don't even know if it's online anymore. I will look for it. If I find it, I will put the link in the description of this video. But I got this, I don't know, almost 20 years ago maybe. So, and I found it very interesting because if any of you were here when we were doing the Mul Mantra course, we went through the 10 sounds, Ek, Onkar, Satnam, and how every one of them relates to one principle. So when we did that, we extracted this. It's a list of 10 principles, 10 virtues, and I just had an idea. Wait, I had an idea. No, it's not working. So as I said, I would probably have to close the software that I'm using for streaming, so that would not work. Anyway, so there were 10 principles, 10 virtues, 10 viruses that I extracted out of that Mul Mantra. This is inspired by the teachings of Kundalini Yoga, and particularly from Ardaas Singh. And what I realized is that these 10 principles align very, very, very closely to what Brian Price was saying in his book as this Code of Chivalry. And it's a pity that we cannot see it in paper, because it would be much clearer, much easier. But I'm not sure if I should even put it in a break. I don't know what can happen. If I try to restart the software, I may lose the whole connection. So I better don't do that. So anyway, so I took those 10 principles that he wrote. I didn't change anything, and I just rearranged them according to the 10 principles from the Mul Mantra. So I'm going to read them the way Brian Price wrote them, and then maybe we can reflect upon it a little bit. So the first one, he wrote humility. He said, value first the contributions of others. Do not boast of your own accomplishments. Let others do this for you. Tell the deeds of others before your own, according them the renown rightfully earned through virtuous deeds. In this way, the office of knighthood is well done and glorified, helping not only the gentle-spoken, but also all who call themselves knights. So if you want to call yourself a knight, it's about the first, I would say the first, because it's when I reorder the principles, is humility. It's about bowing low to the mat, we say in yoga, right? Bow low into the mat, dip low into the mat. Yeah. If you want to grow high, the tree needs strong roots, right? The roots are into the ground, so put your head on the ground. And it's very interesting, this concept, no? That don't talk about yourself. Don't talk about the things that you have accomplished. Just let others talk about you. Just keep yourself humble in that way. And it corresponds to the first virtue that we had from the Mul Mantra, which was humility. That's exactly the same one. So that's pretty much one by one. Yeah. The second principle that he referred to in this code was loyalty. And I will read. Be known for unwavering commitment to the people and ideals that you choose to live by. There are many places where compromise is expected. Loyalty is not amongst them. Yeah? So we may compromise in many things, but not in loyalty. Be known for unwavering commitment to the people and ideals you choose to live by. So you need the commitment, and then be loyal to those that you are committed to. So the commitment is a step that it comes before. Commitment doesn't even appear here as a virtue, even in the code from the Mul Mantra, because commitment is something that is assumed that you do before even starting the spiritual path. I mean, you have to commit to want to align yourself, to want to adhere yourself to a certain code of ethics, and to want to have some personal practice, to want to meditate. You need commitment. So commitment is the basis for everything that can happen in the spiritual path. And it's more as a quality to develop. Commitment is more like an attitude rather than like a virtue, perhaps. So the second one was called loyalty, and we had also loyalty related to the Mul Mantra. We had the Ong linked to obedience and loyalty. So that's very interesting. It's exactly the same. Now, loyalty, you have to be careful what you are loyal to. Make sure that what you are committing to is something dharmic, because otherwise you may, out of loyalty, you may do things which are harming others. And so we have a code behind us, but then if we are loyal to something and something is telling us, no, do this, and that is not aligned with our code, then what do? Yeah, when the one that you are loyal to is asking you to commit acts which are not honorable, then where, what do I do? Do I check my loyalty? Do I confront myself? Is this the right person to feel loyal to? Because this is what would happen, I imagine now in Japan. You have the samurai tradition. They would be very, very extremely loyal people, yeah, to the point that, if their master would tell them to slit their bellies, they would do it, yeah. If they told them to kill their families, they would do it. And that's an incredible level of obedience. So you have to be careful what you are committing to and who you are aligning with. So loyalty to what? You have to be very clear about where do you put that loyalty, yeah? You can be loyal to the guru, yeah, loyal to the teachings. The moment that you choose loyalty to a particular person, then it becomes more complicated because people have their own egos. So that's challenging. Let's go to the third element, and I'm going through the numbers. So when we're going to start the Karam Kriya course, the course on numerology, it will be, I will retake this so that we can see the page in front, but it will make sense that every one of these numbers is aligned, so the number 2 is aligned with loyalty, number 3 would be aligned with the one that we're going to see now, and it will make more sense. But yeah, let's take the third one. The third principle, or the third virtue, was defense in the Code of Chivalry. And let's read it. The ideal knight was sworn by oath to defend his liege lord and those who depended upon him. Seek always to defend your nation, your family, and those to whom you believe worthy of loyalty. Yeah? Seek always to defend your nation, your family, and those to whom you believe worthy of loyalty. So again, this is employing the loyalty that it comes from before. And you are swearing to defend, yeah, the liege lord and those who depended upon him. Now, bringing it into the yogic terms, again, it's about loyal to a particular person, a liege lord, or is it about your alignment to guru, to the teachings, and be loyal to that? But defense, this concept of defense, in the principle that we had from the Mul Mantra, we had equality and kindness, and the virus would be inequality. So when there are issues of inequality in society, there is always those who end up being the victims, yeah, and the ones who suffer the consequences of the inequality. So being a knight in the modern times would be one who is able to defend those against inequality. So fighting for equality, and equality is not just, equal opportunities. Yes, of course, it's equal opportunities, but it's also seeing everyone equally. So everyone who is in front of you, no matter who they are, what they are, where they come from, or their values, their whatever, can you see them in the same way? And that means that, is checking whether we are able to keep our neutrality. Because in order for us to see everyone equally, that means you have to be neutral. If you have some people who are your friends and some people who are your enemies, how can you see them all equally? Of course not, because you already said these are friends, these are enemies, so there is a difference, right? And so ones I'm going to be loyal to, others I'm not going to be loyal to. It's not about being loyal to anyone, even those who are harming you, but it's about seeing everyone as equal. Even the people who are, let's say somebody is doing harm to somebody else, right? And you are noticing this. Well, whoever is doing the harm, let's not be so quick, That's also a person, that's also a human being. They also have a past, they all have a history, and they have their own traumas, and we don't know where they are, we don't know where they have been, and we don't know where they can get to. So the moment that if we react against them, then, judging them, they're doing something wrong, so we need to fight against them. The moment we put them in the category of enemies, we don't allow them to grow. We are just going to fight against them. So always leave the door open for something, some virtuous outcome of whatever situation is. But at the same time, I'm going to defend those who cannot defend themselves. So this is part of the code. Yeah. And it says, defend your nation, your family, and those whom you believe worthy of loyalty. It sounds very much like the 3 levels of karma, yeah? There is the individual karma, the family karma, and the nation karma. So it's again, making sure that you are in relationship to the 3 levels. So we were talking about being neutral, yeah? This is going to connect to the next one. The next element in this Code of Chivalry is the way Brian Price wrote it was franchise, and I believe that word probably comes from frank, from being frank, being true, so from saying the truth. So I would call this one truthful, to be truthful, if I had to translate it to a more modern terms. And let me read what it says. Seek to emulate everything I have spoken of as sincerely as possible, not for the reason of personal gain, but because it is right. Do not restrict your exploration to a small world, but seek to infuse every aspect of your life with these qualities. Should you succeed in even a tiny measure, that you will be well remembered for your quality and virtue. So, you can already tell probably that this is the one that Brian Price put at the very end. So it's nice that he ended with truth. We will end with a different one. But that's why he speaks like, seek to emulate everything I have spoken of as sincerely as possible. So he's saying everything I've spoken of, it will mean the whole code. Yeah. So even though I put it here on the 4th position of the code, it would be referring to the whole code. So let's break down what he says slowly. Yeah. Seek to emulate everything I have spoken of as sincerely as possible. To be sincere. The word sincere, I don't know if anybody knows the history of that word, but I believe comes from sincera. Sincere comes from sincera, from Italian, meaning without wax. Sin without wax, cera. Because if you look at the old, these statues from when was that time? Around Leonardo da Vinci's time, probably, when they were sculpting the statues on marble. Yeah. The thing about sculpture is that this is a stone, and the moment that you hit, the stone is going to break. And if it breaks in a way that you don't like, you may make a mistake, and then it's kind of unfixable, because it's not like paper where you can erase or you can paint on top. This is once you remove something, you cannot put it back. Which is very, very interesting, because on paper, when we are thinking about adding, which is like the positive mind, whatever we are adding, we can always add another layer on top. So you can kind of fix your mistakes by adding something else. But the moment you remove something, it leaves a hole, it leaves an emptiness, and sometimes there is no way to fix that. So in the old times, around that period, when they were doing sculpture, if anybody would make a mistake, and that was totally like unforgivable mistake, and they had to cover it, they would put wax. And it would be white wax, the same color as the marble, and it would look like nothing happened, and you would pretend that the finished piece is perfect. But that piece with wax would not be considered perfect. It would not be considered fully sincere, right? Sincera, not truthful. It's not the true outcome of your art, because you had to fix it in some way. So something that is sincere means something that doesn't have the fixing thing on top. So sincerity coming from that, being truthful in that way. So Brian Price tells us, seek to emulate everything I have spoken of as sincerely as possible, not for the reason of personal gain, but because it is right. So that means because it is right means that you have a sense of right understanding. You can sense when something is right and when something is wrong. Right and wrong are two polars that sometimes we say, no, there is no right or wrong. Thinking makes it so. But there is a kind of right understanding of the world and a wrong understanding of the world. So the moment we can see the world with the neutrality and through a transparent glass without being influenced by my past, my beliefs and my values or whatever was stored in my past, my traumas, then that seeing the world, that's going to be clean, that's going to be transparent, that's going to be sincere, that's going to be truthful. So he says, if you have that kind of right understanding of the world and you see something is right, then, be sincere about your actions without trying to gain anything, with no personal gain, yeah? Which means that this is selfless. So in the Mul Mantra, the fourth element of the Mul Mantra was Satnam. And the virtue that we had found linked to the Satnam was selfless service and truthful. I wish I could show you the page exactly, because it's exactly the words that we are using. So selfless service, that's exactly this concept that we don't do that for personal gain, but because we do it because it's true and because it's right. Yeah. Let's carry on. He says, let's repeat, do not restrict your exploration to a small world, but seek to infuse every aspect of your life with these qualities. So don't stay in your small world, yeah? This is very interesting for a number of reasons. One is we often end up in a little circle of friends or people that think similarly to you. Maybe you have your online groups, right? Your social media places that you tend to frequent, and that you join that group because they think similarly to you. So when everybody's saying the same that you think, you agree with them and you feel that you are all right because everybody's thinking the same. And so anybody who's not thinking the same, they are wrong, right? This is a kind of, I think it's called confirmation bias. I'm not sure about the word itself, the term, but it's something like, I look for the information in this place because I know this place has the same information that I agree with. So now when I get it, it confirms my suspicions. So I believe I am right. Now, that's a small world behavior. So he says, do not restrict your exploration to a small world. When you stay in a small world, you are not... I'm having another thought. I will come into this in a moment. You are not accessing the stranger aspect, the unknown factor. You see, this is a concept that I explored a few times, but it's like if we are not perfect yet, we haven't reached our highest form of ourselves, let's say my highest representation of myself. If I am not yet there, if I'm not my Buddha self yet, then that Buddha Ardaas, let's say, it's an unknown being. It's an unknown. If I want to get there, that means I have to expose myself to the unknown. So if I stay the way I am, I'm not growing. If I want to grow, I need to get out of my comfort zone and therefore also out of my small world. So in a way, for example, me posting videos in YouTube is an opportunity for people to react and share things and also contradict and disagree with me. And I think that's good. That's healthy. That's helping you grow. When you hear voices which are different from yours, it's going to help you expand your horizon and maybe meet your unknown and grow into that. This is the problem with YouTube. The moment that you are watching videos, the algorithm is learning what you like and it's going to give you more of that. And that's going to confirm what you think. So that's not going to help you to actually explore the unknown. It's actually going to try to feed you whatever you already like. So that's not ideal. Yeah, there should be an option to click a button in YouTube and say, "Give me something wild," give me the unknown, throw me into the unknown, into the deep end. I want to see what else is there. Yeah. The other thought that just occurred to me, and I said I would mention, it's some research done on a small world. There is a small world is a particular concept, a particular kind of simulation experiment that was done in computer science. I did some work on that when I finished the university degree. And it was a simulation where you put a number of agents, AI agents, little software agents, and you put them to interact with each other. And they can choose to help each other, collaborate, or fight against each other and maybe steal the resources from the other, or maybe somehow like take advantage of the others, right? So this is something that I was mentioning in the video on AI. It's very clear. On the long term, it's much better to collaborate. And if you are within a small network, small world network, of friends or agents or AI in that case, you will realize soon that if we collaborate once with each other, we are all advancing, we're all progressing, we're all benefiting. But when I was doing that research with small world networks, something very interesting would happen. Even if you have like 1,000 agents, all operating and even all of them collaborating, and then suddenly you add a new one, and that new one decides not to collaborate. This is kind of based on the prisoner's dilemma. If you don't know the prisoner's dilemma, we may go into that some other day. I think that's a fascinating topic. But if the other one doesn't decide to collaborate, then he can take advantage of the others who are all very, very friendly. Yeah, let's say it's a community of friendly people. It's a neighborhood and everybody wants to help each other. And suddenly there's a new person. Welcome. Oh, you are moving in. That's nice. Come. Do you need help moving in? We'll help you. Yes, please. Okay, we'll help you. We help you move in. We give you some food. We give you some nice things for you to settle. And now you are in our community, so we're going to welcome you to our events and welcome you into our houses. And somehow, as you are getting into our houses, you are stealing our things. So you see, a small world network that is collaborating, the moment that you put somebody from the outside and they decide to not collaborate, what would happen is that these would create suspicion amongst those who were already collaborating, and they would stop collaborating. And so one little agent, 1,000 collaborating, you put one which is not, and suddenly is disrupting the whole order of society, let's say, unless that was like identified. That element would be identified and isolated in some way and dealt with different, let's say, rules. Yeah, that element. Otherwise, it's a mess, and then the whole collaboration that was set up is kind of lost. Now, that's very interesting for our society because I'm just philosophizing here. Eh? That's what I generally do. But I was talking about how psychopaths in our society is only 1%. Yeah, and yet there has to be some ways, some means to deal with them. Because otherwise, if you just let them free and nobody knows who they are, and then they are not accountable for their actions, then everybody's suspicious of everybody because you don't know if the person who you're going to meet is one of those 1%. So you're always going to have to be checking: is this the psychopath one, right? So having accountability is very important in these things, and that's why in this concept of defense should include that, not defense those who cannot defend themselves from this 1%, let's say. So when the Code of Chivalry says, do not restrict your exploration to a small world, means open yourself to the wider world so that you are exposed to the unknown, but also you see different ways of operating. And then we are coming out of our little circle where it's much easier to collaborate when we are in our small world. And when we get out, we are more facing like a harsh environment, and we need to grow because of that. So that's also very interesting, linked to the aspect of exposing ourselves to something wider. So I'm still reading the truthful one, yeah? But seek to infuse every aspect of your life with these qualities. Yes, so you succeed in even a tiny measure, then you will be well remembered for your quality and your virtue. Okay, so this is the truthful one. We could say that the last two lines are more like the ending of the whole code. But that's the one I placed in the fourth place. So let's see what the fifth element of the Code of Chivalry was. It's named courage. And he says, being a knight often means choosing the more difficult path, the personally expensive one. Be prepared to make personal sacrifices in service of the precepts and people you value. At the same time, a knight should seek wisdom to see that stupidity and courage are cousins. Courage also means taking the side of truth in all matters, rather than seeking the expedient lie. Seek the truth whenever possible, but remember to temper justice with mercy, or the pure truth can bring grief. That's a lot in there. It's packed. So let me unpack it slowly. Yeah? Being a knight, by the way, the title is courage. I would name this one sacrifice because it's linked to what we were in the principles and virtues from the Mool Mantra. The fifth one would be sacrifice, but he does mention this concept of sacrifice. Remember, sacrifice is sacred office, is something sacred, and we come from the truthful element, so it's about being truthful. And let's see what he says. Being a knight often means choosing the more difficult path, the personally expensive one. I read expansive, and I'm thinking, that's what is expansive as well. Going through the hardship is going to expand you. So that's interesting. But yeah, choosing the more difficult path, the personally expensive one. So not be afraid to pay the price for walking the path of chivalry. I remember there is something as well about dying. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go into battle, it's very possible that you end up dying, yeah? If you're going to expose yourself to the unknown, you're going to come out of your comfort zone. Maybe people will try to kill you, metaphorically or physically, yeah? It could be, your reputation, or it can be your image, or whatever they want to kill you, yeah? But if you, disregard those risks, and then you choose the more difficult path, in yoga we say that the path of death is a solitary one. Yeah? The moment we die, we all go in a solitary path. And that solitary path is a difficult path, the path of death. There is something beyond death. Maybe someday we will talk about that as well. But there's many topics opening up. But it's said that it's a solitary path, and it's a difficult path. So choosing that path in life, the difficult path, the one that is personally expensive, is preparing you for the day that you have to cross the great void. It's a sacrifice. Yeah? Be prepared to make personal sacrifices in service of the precepts and people that you value. Yeah, personal sacrifices. This is the sacred office. This is the office of being able to sacrifice yourself in the name of truth, in the name of justice, mercy, whatever the virtue is. Yeah. At the same time, a knight should seek wisdom to see that stupidity and courage are cousins. Now, when it says seek wisdom, it's very interesting because we look for wisdom outside. Yeah. And yes, sometimes we can receive the wisdom from the inside, but mostly something that we receive. So being able to, for example, receive wisdom in prayer, or having somebody who is a higher wisdom, level than us as a reference that we can go to and we can ask for counsel. That's very important. That's why in yoga we say, we need a spiritual teacher, because when we are not in wisdom, when we are confusing courage and stupidity, when we are in our avidya, in our ignorance, we need somebody from the outside who has that wisdom to recalibrate us and to realign us. Yeah? This is what the issue with artificial intelligence is. How do we make this good alignment? Because by itself, how can we know that it's going to be aligning itself? Yeah. So in terms of us, do we have somebody? Do we have a spiritual teacher or somebody, or a minister or somebody that is wise, and they are going to keep you aligned in the path? So that's very interesting. And he says, is wise to know that stupidity and courage are cousins. Yeah, this is interesting because also in the old times, in the times where this code of chivalry would be applied, knighthood would be starting from pretty young. Actually, you didn't have to be born of a blue blood to access the knighthood. And you could, if you went through the whole process, anybody could be a knighthood. Even a woman, at that time, it was also accepted. And there is a number of cases of women who would be knights as well. But you would all start cleaning the stables, cleaning the horses, and making sure that, that your master's swords and weapons are clean and so on. So you have to start from the bottom. That teaches you the humility and the personal sacrifice and its expensive path, and teaches you service and selfless service. And but then as you are progressing in age and progressing in wisdom and mastery of the different arms, for example, you could become a knight. Now, if you become a knight, you would be quite young, probably at that time, because actually people died very young. And we know now from neuroscience that it's very interesting research that the brain is not fully developed until maybe around 25, particularly for men. And it would, up until 25, it's still integrating itself. That is the place where it's, pruning all those networks that it doesn't need, all those connections that it doesn't need, and specializing in whatever you are working on at that time. So if you spend, the years when you are 18, 19, 20, you spend a lot of the time playing Candy Crush, or I don't know what kind of game do they play now with the phone, or maybe social media, doing like this with a thumb, yeah? So this is what the networks that are going to be more integrated in your brain, and the others are going to be pruned, because that's between like the end of the adolescence and 25. During that time, like 16 to 25, let's say, the brain is consolidating. So during that time, especially for men, I was saying, but again, this code of chivalry would be mainly made for men, even though I just said that women could also be knights. But during that time, the brain is programmed in such a way that you seek risks in some way. Or let's say that you are not so capable of evaluating risks. And that's why, when we are young, we may do stupid things. And mainly we do it for the social approval. Yeah, if your group of friends are asking you to do something to be cool, then maybe you are more willing to do that. So you are willing to disregard risks for the sake of social approval. And that is not courage, right? That's stupidity. So very interesting that he would put this encoded in the Code of Chivalry, because if you were within that age, you will have to be very careful that you are not confusing one with the other. So very interesting. Now, all this within one little line. Yeah, it's all packed in one line. Let's go on. Courage also means taking the side of truth in all matters, rather than seeking the expedient lie. So it's about truth in all matters. Be truthful. Now, it's always more complicated when we lie. But in Spanish, we say, la mente miente. La mente miente. Yeah? The mind lies. mind and lies are very similar words in Spanish, and that's because the mind likes to lie. It doesn't often get you to see the truth as it is. So he's telling us, look, don't seek the expedient lie. Take the side of truth in all matters. This is what courage means. Now, the word courage itself, since I'm going to look at the etymology of words, courage would come from cor, heart. So to have courage means to have heart in a way. And the heart tells the truth. So it's about, lies are from the mind. The heart tells the truth. So courage means taking the side of the truth, taking the side of the heart in all matters. And that's where the commitment has to be. So when we were starting with the humility, if you remember, we were talking about commitment. And I said, well, commitment has to be even before. So that's something that the heart has to sustain and nurture within, the commitment. And the commitment to stay with the truth, not to seek the lie. And remember also another thing, I'm connecting many, many things, but a lie basically is the ego. The definition of ego is the false self, so not truth. So are you going to be aligned with the ego, or are you going to be aligned with the truth, with the heart, with the courage? Because if you're going to be holding a sword, and if you are going to be using that sword from the ego, very, very soon you go down the path where you don't find sanity, you find insanity. And this is the kind of things that the whole research started with this. How can a man go into battle, come back and not lose his mind? Not have, this PTSD that all he does is like see blood everywhere. So I think that this is part of the ingredients, when you take that sword, and it can be metaphorical, it doesn't have to be physical sword, but when you're going to go into battle, do you do it from your ego, or do you do it with courage from the truth? And that also, remember, courage and stupidity are cousins. So do you have the wisdom to differentiate both? So it's not just about, I do it with courage from the truth. But really? Because the lie is not only lying outside, but is lying within. So can we be truthful to ourselves, or are we lying to ourselves? And this is a much more critical issue and much more difficult to see whether we are lying to ourselves or not. Seek the truth whenever possible, but remember to temper justice with mercy, or the pure truth can bring grief. Incredible. This sentence is amazing. Let me read it again. Seek the truth whenever possible, but remember to temper justice with mercy, or the pure truth can bring grief. Pure truth can bring grief. So something I was mentioning the other day on communication, there is a number of rules of communication. One of them would be, don't say anything that is not necessary, kind, and true. So just because something is true, I'm not going to say it. Because remember, the word and the sword, there's only a letter difference, right? So our words are often like our swords. And this whole discussion about chivalry and knighthood and swords, I mean, some people are in actual battles, physical battles. They are maybe in a war zone. But most people who are going to hear these words, your battle is in the world with your words, and your words are your swords. So, and words can be really damaging. With words you can kill somebody's reputation, kill somebody's well-being in some way. You can say something to somebody and cause a harm that you cannot even imagine. So words are like swords. So saying something just because it's truth, remember, pure truth can bring grief. If I'm going to say, if it's something true, then I still have to check the other two things. Is it necessary and is it kind? Necessary, kind, and true. So just because it's true, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to go for battle just because it's truth. So if it's going to be truth, I'm going to check if it's necessary. And if it's necessary, then I still go in with kindness. And that kindness is kind of linked to the mercy as well. Because he says here, remember to temper justice with mercy. Now it's very interesting because justice and mercy will come in the following virtues of the chivalry code. And temper justice with mercy. Temper. I wonder, the word temper is also something that is used for making weapons, if I'm not wrong. So you need to temper the metal. I think tempering would be like when you are like bringing the sword into the heat and then you heat it and then you put it in the cold water and then the metal would become harder. And so it still retains the shape and it has certain flexibility, but it's hard enough. And that is a process of tempering. So into the heat, into the water, and beating it out. Tempering is a very interesting concept, and I'm going to reflect more upon this because there is a process of tempering within us, with our own ego and with our own selves as we are going on in our spiritual path. And we need to go do that, put ourselves into the heat and then the water. Is linked to the stress and the relaxation process as well, yeah? I have a video on the relaxation and the stress and how we need to find the balance of both because that's the optimum point of vitality. But that's also another thing, I'm going to be working on myself, maybe my personal sadhana, my practice, my yoga, that's going to be the heat. And then you are out into the world and then you are being banged, yeah? And then you come home and relax, recuperate, recycle, renew, yeah? Reject everything that is not for you and go to bed. So it's kind of going into the water. And that's like a day in, day out process of tempering ourselves through living yoga in life. And so tempering is a very interesting word. He says, temper justice with mercy. So, seeking for justice or bringing mercy. Because justice is often going to take you to go and the fight. But mercy is about forgiveness. And forgiveness is a crucial element in the spiritual path. So we're going to go into mercy in a little bit. Let's go on. So this was all about sacrifice and courage. Let's go into the sixth virtue. It's called faith. A knight must have faith in his beliefs, for faith roots him and gives hope against the despair that human failings create. Faith roots him and gives hope against the despair that human failings create. So it's acknowledging that there is a despair. There is going to be a despair. If you're going to go into battle, you're going to go fight in the world, yeah? And remember this battle, I didn't mention it before, but this whole quest about the Code of Chivalry was also influenced by the Bhagavad Gita, yeah? And after reading the Gita, at that time, I was very much in the position that Arjuna took at the beginning of the book when he says, I don't want to fight. That's how I was. I don't want to fight. And then to me, it was really shocking and confronting to hear how Krishna would say, it is your duty to fight in a way. It is the personal expensive path, but it is your duty. And so that was really difficult for me to hear. And I think that's why what motivated me research a little bit on this Code of Chivalry. But so there is despair. If you're going to go into a battle, you're going to go into a fight, there is going to be a despair. There's going to be an outcome, and there's going to be a sacrifice there. But faith keeps you rooted. I remember there was a workshop that my teacher did once for men. And he in this workshop, we would generally go and walk in the mountains for a good number of hours, and then we would have some spiritual teachings and meditate, and then go walking for more hours. Sometimes walking into the night, sometimes walking into the morning, and there would be one year he asked this question: "Are you a man of faith?" And if you're a woman, you can just say that to yourself as well. Are you a woman of faith? Are you a man of faith? Are you a person of faith? And what does that mean? Because if you have no faith, then you're exposed to the despair. And the faith brings you hope. But hope not in the way that, well, I hope things will get better. That hope is kind of passive and is kind of karmic as well. The path of the knight, the path in chivalry, is not the path of the one who just waits hoping for things to get better. It's the one who is gonna take the sword and go to battle to do the personally expensive path, but having the faith in the belief that you are fighting for truth. Yeah. And always checking, am I being courageous or am I being stupid? Do I keep my wisdom or am I being misaligned? So faith is something that is going to help us keep our alignment and keep this connection, and it roots us like a root. Very interesting. So if we look into the Mool Mantra's code that I decoded in the Mool Mantra course, the sixth virtue was actually called faithful and justice. Here comes the concept of justice that I was just talking about a little bit before, but also linked to faith, having faith. So very interesting, yeah? It's quite literally one by one. A few of them have the name a bit changed, but one by one, every one of the elements from this Code of Chivalry, this old Code of Chivalry, is aligned with the principles and virtues that Guru Nanak talked about in the Mool Mantra. So very, very interesting. Let's go to the seventh one. And the seventh, Brian Price calls that justice. He says righteousness. I would call that more like right to be linked to mercy. But we will see what he means. Sometimes the title is not as clear as the text. When you read the text, it's very clear what he means. So he says, seek always the path of right. The path of right, unencumbered by bias or personal interest. Recognize that the sword of justice can be a terrible thing, so it must be tempered by humanity and mercy. If the right you see agrees with others, and you seek it out without bending it to the temptation for expediency, then you will earn renown beyond measure. I will read it again because that was a bit strange the way I read it. Let me just check. Yeah, just checking that the original is written the same way. So let's unpack this. Seek always the path of right. Now, when we go into the seventh principle, when we will study numbers, we will see that the number 7 is linked to mind, and the mind likes to judge. And it's important that this judgment is made through their right understanding. So righteousness and right understanding is very much linked to number 7. And when you understand things in the right way, there is no friends, there is no enemies. This is what the Mool Mantra was telling us. That's why the 7th virtue in the Mool Mantra would be mercy, forgiveness, and no enemies. So, seeking the path of right means having right understanding, what the Buddhists would call right understanding. To see things in the right way, meaning not with the bias of the ego, not with the filter of the ego, of my past trauma, but actually seeing things clearly. So remember, he says here, seek always the path of right, unencumbered by bias or personal interest. And personal interest also comes here, yeah? If you are just looking for being well known, for people to know you, to have some merit or something, don't look for that. Remember, the first principle was humility, right? Don't talk about what you did. Let others talk about you. You just do what you have to do. And it's an expensive path, so just do that. And when we come here into this place of right, yeah, he's telling unencumbered by bias or personal interest. Without personal interest means selfless. So we are going to go back to the selfless act of service, defending the ones who need to be defended, yeah? Loyal to those who have to be loyal, and we are selfless, and that's the path of sacrifice. Recognize that the sword of justice can be a terrible thing, so it must be tempered with humanity and mercy. The sort of justice is linked to the sixth principle in numerology, we would say, linked to the justice aspect, because we say nothing is just, all just is. Yeah, we will go into this when we talk about the numerology. We will start the course next week. But the sort of justice can be a terrible thing. Yeah, it must be tempered by humanity and mercy. We already reflected upon this word tempered, and it needs to have mercy and humanity. So it kind of links the mercy with the humanity. Remember, this is the seventh virtue from the Mul Mantra, is mercy, and that's what makes us all human. To be human is to err, and if it's human to err, then we should forgive as well. It has to be part of the equation. So if the right you see agrees with others, and you seek it out without bending to the temptation for expediency, then you will earn renown beyond measure. So she says, do you want honor? Do you want to be renowned? Just don't worry about it. Just don't try to run after that. Just stay in the right, stay in the path of righteousness. Okay, let's move on. Let's go into the eighth principle. Here, Brian Price would call this largesse. I think it would be pronounced more or less like this, largesse. I would say this is the principle of abundance. Let me see. Let me read what it says. Be generous insofar as your resources allow. Largesse, used in this way, counters gluttony. It also makes the path of mercy easier to discern when a difficult decision of justice is required. I know it's difficult to see all this, or just hear it without seeing it. I will put the document in the members section for the channel. So if anybody wants to read it, you can read it through there. So, be generous insofar as your resources allow. Largesse, used in this way, counters gluttony. So gluttony, he talks about faith, and traditionally, knighthood would be very much linked to being Christian. I don't associate being a knight with Christianity necessarily, but it's interesting that the Christianity has studied many things, including the evils, including the sins, the capital sins. Now, gluttony would be one of them, and it would be linked to being very attached to material things. So largesse, this being generous, is helping counter that, to align yourself with the selfless path. It also makes the path of mercy easier to discern when a difficult decision of justice is required. It makes the path of mercy easier to discern when a difficult decision of justice is required. So, if this is the Code of Chivalry, this is for knights, and this would be also for the lords, knights and lords, those who would be ruling in the land. So in the land, there could be a number of peasants, and they would need help for whatever reason, and if they needed a judge, let's say, they would call upon the Lord. Hopefully the Lord would be a knight. So if you have to decide what is just, now, here comes the aspect of how do you know what is, do I have to be merciful, or do I have to bring the sword of justice, which, remember, is a terrible thing. So what do I need to do here? And so the principle of largesse, be generous, it's interesting. So always, if you have to err, do it on the side of being generous. So that's interesting. So abundance and generosity. So if we read the eighth principle in the Mul Mantra, is compassion. And it's exactly that, what we are talking about, isn't it? Like you are in the middle of a conflict and you have to decide, am I going to go into mercy or am I going to go into the sword of justice? And he says, well, be compassionate. Yeah, no matter what, just bring your compassion. So, but compassion also means compassion towards the innocent, those who suffered. Yeah, if somebody is doing evil and they are damaging others, it is your compassion for the others to take care of this evil one in some way. And I was saying, in a small world network, you have to isolate the one who is creating the dissonance with the others and apply different rules of engagement with that one, yeah, than with the others. In most societies, they just put them in jail. But we will have to figure out what is an appropriate way to deal justice in whatever context you are dealing with. If this is a company, we are not talking about jail. But if somebody in the company, and it's an important element of the company, it's necessary, but they are not cooperating with others and they are doing what they want, or they are stealing credit from somebody else, you have to deal with them in a particular way. And you have to apply also compassion to the others, but also compassion to this person. So it's not easy. It requires wisdom, but we have to bring all these elements. And remember, abundance, righteousness, compassion, all these qualities. If you are in doubt, anytime you find yourself in doubt, go back to the principles. Anytime you find the answer is not clear, go back to the principles. Yeah, go back to your alignment. Go back to your faith, realign yourself, and find what is the wisdom here. Is it the sword of justice? Be careful. Yeah, be careful with the sword. It's a terrible thing. Yeah, it has to be tempered. Is it about forgiveness? Is it about just mercy? Well, some people have to be defended as well. So you have to be always balancing both things. And this is why in the spiritual path it is said, this is as difficult as walking on the edge of a sword. Yeah, it's really sharp. You can cut yourself, but walking is like walking on the side of the sword. That is so easy to fall on one side or the other. Yeah, it's really difficult to be in this edge. That's an interesting concept. When you listen to the Buddha's teaching, he talks about the middle path. And sometimes it looks like the middle path is the easier one, because we're not going into any extremes, always being in the middle. But actually, it's quite extreme to be able to hold yourself always in the middle. And some paths are so narrow that to walk the edge of the sword is really difficult, and you can cut yourself. But that's the middle path, because the alternative is just falling down this edge or falling down the other. So walking around the middle path, that's so hard. And this is why we say yoga and the spiritual world or life is full of paradoxes. And paradoxes is when you find yourself in between two things, and both seem fine or correct or incorrect, and yet you have to put them both into balance. So always walking the paradox, always on the middle of the line, yeah? It's really interesting concept. So that was the 8th principle. Let's go into the 9th. And the 9th, he would call it nobility. I really like this one. It's something that really calls to me. I don't know if it's because I have a number 9 in my date of birth very strongly, but it's something that really calls to me, this one. Let me read it. Seek great stature of character by holding to the virtues and duties of a knight, realizing that though the ideals cannot be reached, the quality of striving towards them ennobles the spirit, growing the character from dust towards the heavens. Nobility also has the tendency to influence others, offering a compelling example of what can be done in the service of rightness. What can be done in the service of rightness? Again, service, the selfless act, rightness, the rightfulness. We already talked about these two elements, but here there is another new element that we didn't talk about, this nobility. Let's reflect upon this. And by the way, in the Mul Mantra, the ninth one would be peace and patience, but it's linked to the 9th spiritual body, which is the subtle body, our spirit. So we will see how this is connected. Let me read it again, but slowly now. Seek great stature of character. Stature of character. So he's talking about, being long. Quite interesting because it's the 9th principle. It's like number 9. Number 9 is really tall, yeah? Seek great stature of character by holding to the virtues and duties of a knight. By the way, stature of character. And remember that we started with commitment. In yoga, we say there are 7 steps towards happiness and 7 steps towards hell. 7 steps to heaven, 7 steps to hell. And the first step to heaven is commitment. Maybe also another topic that we can explore in another video, but commitment brings you character. It's your commitment that is going to create a certain character, a strong character. And we need a strong character to do the spiritual path. We cannot, the feeble and the weak one is not going to survive. This is a challenging one. Remember, this is the path of personal expense. Yeah, it's an expensive path. And it takes character to do that. And character takes commitment. So the commitment is going to bring the character. So, seek great stature of character by holding to, that means committing to and sticking to it, holding to the virtues and duties of a knight, the ones that we are just reading. Realizing that though the ideals cannot be reached, the quality of striving towards them ennobles the spirit. So the ideals cannot be reached. How interesting. We are talking about something that is ideal. Even the Mul Mantra is talking about the ideal. When we are talking about Ekonkara Satanam Karta Purak Nirbo Nirvera Kal Muratajuni Sai Bangar Prasaja Pacha Jugatsat Hebisatana Husevisat. That is the ideal. How can we realize that? That's perfection. Who is perfect? Only God is perfect. So I will never make it there. And yet, he says, look, realizing that though the ideals cannot be reached, because, by definition, they are idealized, you put them up there in a pedestal, right? You cannot reach to them, but the quality of striving towards them ennobles the spirit. So fighting towards that ideal is going to ennoble the spirit. So here's where the spirit comes, that I mentioned before. Growing the character from dust towards the heavens. So you are holding on to the commitment, and your character goes from dust to the heavens. There is a beautiful saying that I love, that he says, I'd rather reach for the stars and fall in the dust than reach for the dust and make it. Sometimes I read it like, reach for the heavens and fall in the mud, rather than reach for the mud and made it. Yeah, today I made it like dust because it makes sense with this, yeah? So reach for the heavens and I'd rather reach for the heavens and fall in the mud than reach for the mud and make it. So put your ideals high enough, and even if they are impossible to reach, make it so that you are always going to go trying to get there. And this is what Guru Nanak does constantly, yeah, even in the Mul Mantra. Later on in the Japji, he will say, talk about this is like chewing iron. It's so hard. But then he's doing it. He's talking about it. He's doing it even though he says it's as hard as chewing iron, he's still doing it. Because that's the only way we have to ennoble the spirit. Yeah, and the spirit is the one that is, we're trying to ennoble the spirit. We're trying to call onto it, to crystallize it, to become a core soul so that we can get there, yeah, get to the heavens. That's what we want. He says, look, growing the character from the dust towards the heavens. How interesting also this. When we get to the 9, number 9 and number 1 are connected. When we get to the 9, the number 1 comes up. And the number 1 was humility. Remember? Bow down. Bring your head down on the dust. Yeah? Guru Nanak says many, many times, and the other gurus as well in the Sikh tradition, they talked about how I am the dust under the feet of the saints. I am the dust under the feet of the saints, or under the feet of the pilgrims. It's a very, very humble way to say I'm the lowest of the low, but going into the dust. That's humility to the extreme. But in a way, this is what you go into that dust, and you make yourself that dust, removing any sort of ego. That's when you get to the heavenly dust, yeah? The heavens. The dust in the heavens is the stars, right? So it's like going into the dust in the ground, then you meet the dust in the heavens. I think it said something, there is something about in the spiritual path, enlightenment is like going through the head of a needle, something like that, or passing through the head of a needle. And it's really, really difficult passing through the head of the needle, because if you have the smallest bit of ego, it's going to get trapped in it. So this thread that is going through the ego is kind of like the thread of the Kundalini going up the spine, right? If you have a little bit of ego, you're not going to be able to come out through the 10th chakra. So you have to be starting in the dust. Also, look, the Kundalini has to start in the bottom, the first chakra, the dust, yeah? So we have to go down. Before we even try to go up, we have to go down. And when we go down, and we go down with that humility, then from there, look up, look for the ideals, keep them high, and strive for them. And that's what is going to ennoble the spirit. I find this paragraph, this particular paragraph, the most compelling, the most... it's really exciting for me. Reading these words is really empowering, yeah? It's something that it can guide you, it can motivate you, inspire you, yeah? So, nobility. And he also says that nobility also has a tendency to influence others. But that's the thing, if you try to do something to influence others does not have the same effect, in fact, probably will not have the effect, that if you just do something because you are striving towards that ideal, right? That through your strength of your commitment in your character, that is going to have an effect on others. But if you try to do something in order to affect the others, then that's not going to work. So you just try to do your own path. Forget about trying to impress anyone. Yeah. And we talked about this also in another principle. Yeah, this you will earn renown beyond measure, and do not boast your own accomplishments. Yeah, all these things are like little pieces that are connecting. Let's go into the 10th one, the final one. For the final, I put the one that in the code, in the original code, is placed as the first one. And I will read it. Prowess is called. I would call it excellence, because of alignment with the numbers, yeah? To seek excellence in all endeavors expected of a knight, martial and otherwise, seeking strength to be used in the service of justice, rather than impersonal aggrandizement. So again, to seek excellence in all endeavors expected of a knight, martial and otherwise. To seek excellence, to be excellent self, to be the highest self that you can be, also to connect to your higher self, right? But to be your excellent self. This is why this is like a continuous meditation. This is like a constant realignment, a personal realignment, all day, always, anytime, especially when you're in doubt, especially when you're in a situation you don't know what to do. What does the code tell me? How can I align myself? What is the rightful thing to do? Is this chivalrous? Yeah? Does this contain the principles of abundance, of compassion, of mercy? Does it contain these basic principles or not? What would be the merciful thing to do? Sometimes it's useful to think about people who you find that they are like the embodiment of these principles. I have a number of examples for different principles, but let's say for the principle of peace, that would be Gandhi. So for me, I would think, well, what would Gandhi do in this situation, right? It's an extreme because he's an extreme person with a really extreme character, but it would help me choose what is my action, what I have to do. So seek excellence in all endeavors, not just martial, but otherwise. And being a knight would be not only being able to go into war and fighting, but when you go back home and you have a land, you have your kingdom, you have your castle, you have your wife, you have your family, then how do you behave? And you would be expected to be able to do a dance or whatever are the different traditions that would all be in a day-to-day life of a knight as well. And there would be a lot of things as well included into that. So seeking excellence in every endeavor, no matter if it's martial or not. Seeking strength to be used in the service of justice rather than in personal aggrandizement. Personal aggrandizement, like making yourself big. So use your strength in the service of justice, not to boost yourself up. The 10th one would be excellence, and I would connect it with the 10th spiritual body of radiance and royal courage. I didn't mention how the nobility was connected to the peace. I mentioned in the Mul Mantra would be peace. That would be the 9th one, linked to the nobility. But when you are striving for an ideal, when you are reaching for the stars, reaching for as high as you can, you are at peace with yourself. If you are lazy, postponing things, and not really doing your best, not giving your best, then you are always uneasy with yourself. So there is, in the knowing that you are reaching for the stars, there is a peacefulness within. Why you do? And that's it. That's the 10 principles and the 10. Let me read them, just the title. Humility, loyalty, defense, franchise, truthfulness, courage, I would call sacrifice, faith, justice or mercy, largesse, abundance, nobility, and prowess or excellence. How did it touch you? Did you listen to it? Did you process it? Did you manage to connect to it in some way? Has it touched you in some way? Did you research this on your own? Did you ever read upon this? I would be interested to know if there is a similar code, not just for knights, but particularly for women in that age, in that era. Because I never really researched that in depth, but I knew that a dame, a woman who is a high caliber woman in that age would be required also to have a number of qualities and virtues. And she would have to master a number of arts as well, like dancing and poetry. But I've never come upon a code of similar to the Code of Chivalry for women. But maybe somebody knows. If you know, please put it in the comments of the video when the video is recorded, and share it with the group so we can learn from that. I will put this PDF document I will share it in the how do you call that? The bulletin board, the bulletin where I post the posts, the community tab for the members so that you can read it. And I'm sorry that the camera wasn't working. It's a pity today. It didn't want to work, but anyway, what I do, it's what it was. And I'm going to go away. I'm going to be a week away. Also, last week, I had to remove some of the days that I was supposed to be streaming for some issues. I cannot always, see so far ahead when I begin the month, when am I going to be streaming. But next week, I'm going to start with the Karam Kriya course. So we're going to start with the numbers, and I'm excited for that. I hope you are as well. But thank you for being here. I hope the topic of chivalry touched you in some way, and it was interesting and maybe inspiring. And until next time, thank you. Sadnam.